So here, after the religious leaders accused Jesus of doing what was not lawful on the Sabbath, verse 3, Jesus said, have you not even read? Have you not even read what David did when he was hungry? Who's David? King of Israel. Which king? Second king. Who was the first king? Saul. Good king, bad king? Bad king. David was the second king of Israel. Good king, bad king? Good king. And we'll see why that's important in a few moments. Jesus said, have you not even read what David did when he was what? Hungry. He and those who were with him. How David entered the house of God. And David took and ate the consecrated bread, which is not lawful for anyone to eat except the priest alone. And not only that, David even gave that bread, the consecrated bread, to his companions. Your attention, please. Old Testament, God gave law saying that every Sabbath, the priest was required to put fresh, consecrated bread, show bread, on the table there in the holy area. You guys know, you have, whether it's a tabernacle or the temple, you have the courtyard. You then come in, you have the holy area, you have the curtain, and then behind the curtain, the most holy area, right? The Holy of Holies. Well, here in the holy area, you had the table of presence, and that's where every Sabbath, the priest would come in, and he would put 12 loaves of consecrated bread on the table. Why 12? Symbolic of the 12 tribes of Israel, right? So that fresh bread would be put out every Sabbath. The next Sabbath, the priest would come in with 12 new fresh loaves of bread. What did he do with the 12 loaves that had been there for a week? He removed them. But he, as the priest, and only the priest, was allowed to eat that older bread, right? Well, Jesus says to the Pharisees, oh, you want to accuse me that I'm breaking the Sabbath law? Have you not even read what King David did when he was hungry? Let's go read the story real quick. 1 Samuel chapter 21. First Samuel 21, again, who was the first king of Israel? Saul, right? God removed him and was going to put his own king, King David, in that position. Well, Saul, was he happy when he found out that he was no longer going to be king and that David was going to be? Not quite. So Saul was constantly trying to kill David. Saul became a madman, right? Well, here in chapter 21, David and his companions had been running from Saul. Saul was out to kill David. So naturally, when David and his companions came to this place called Nob, or City of Priests, which is about a mile away from Jerusalem, David and his companions were exhausted. They had been running for a while. They were thirsty and they were what? Starving. Let's see what happens. Chapter 21, verse 1. Then David came to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. And Ahimelech came trembling to meet David and said to him, why are you alone and no one with you? David said to Elimelech the priest, the king has commissioned me with a matter and has said to me, let no one know anything about the matter on which I am sending you and with which I have commissioned you. I have directed the young men to a certain place. Verse 3, now therefore, David, starving, asks the priest, what do you have on hand to eat? I'm starving. We're starving. Give me 5 loaves of bread. Which bread was he referring to? Well, the only bread that would have been there, the bread in the holy area. Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever can be found. The priest answered David and said, well, there's no ordinary bread on hand. In other words, I can't go down to the bakery and just find you ordinary bread. There's no ordinary bread on hand. But there is consecrated bread. The showbread that the priest would put out every Sabbath, there's consecrated bread. And then the priest said, okay, I can give you that if only the young men have kept themselves from women. David answered the priest and said, surely women have been kept from us as previously. I mean, the poor people, they were running. They didn't have time for women, right? Surely women have been kept from us as previously when I set out, and the vessels, the bodies of the young men were holy, though it was an ordinary journey. How much more today will their vessels or bodies be holy? Verse 6. So the priest Ahimelech gave to David what kind of bread to eat? The consecrated bread. That was the only thing that was available. You know the bread that was to be in the holy area? The priest gave him consecrated bread. For there was no bread there but the bread of the presence, which was removed from before the Lord, right? Every Sabbath, in order to put hot bread, fresh bread, in its place when it was taken away. And naturally in verse 8, God got so upset with David and the priest, we read that God's holy wrath was poured out on David and the priest because David ate holy bread. Is that what it says? Nope. Nope. In fact, nowhere in Scripture are we told that even though that bread of presence, once it was removed, was only to be eaten by the priests, we see that the priest, looking at David and his companions and thinking they're going to starve to death, he gave that bread. And nowhere in Scripture are we told that God condemned David or that priest. Why? Because nowhere in Scripture does God say, let people die on the Sabbath because it's the Sabbath. Of course you can offer mercy to somebody even on the Sabbath, right? So let's go back now to Luke chapter 6. Again, starting in verse 1, we know it happened that as Jesus was passing through some grain fields on a Sabbath, and his disciples were picking the heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands, and eating the grain, the poor men were starving to death. Some of the Pharisees said to Jesus, why do you do what is unlawful on the Sabbath? Jesus answered them saying, have you not even read, you experts of the law? Have you not even read what King David did when he was hungry, he and his companions? How David entered the house of God there in Nob. He took and ate the consecrated bread, which, oh, by the way, was not lawful for anyone to eat except the priests alone. And not only did David eat that bread, he gave it to his companions who were also starving to death. And notice Jesus doesn't say, and God struck them dead. Why? Because nowhere in Scripture does God say, if someone's starving to death, if someone's dying from a disease, if somebody, is in a life-threatening situation, nowhere does God say, well, it's Sabbath, you gotta just let them die. And that's why Jesus really nailed the Pharisees by saying, you never read? You know King David. Obviously you know King David. You're religious leaders, right? You know who David is? Haven't you read what happened there? Oh, you can imagine the religious leaders going, oh yeah, we read that. We know that story. Well, how come God didn't strike them dead? And then look what Jesus says in verse 5. And Jesus was saying to them, the Son of Man, referring to himself, is what? Lord of the Sabbath. Look on the screen. The religious leaders say, why do you do not what is not lawful? Jesus said, have you not even read? And then Jesus says, oh, by the way, you know the one you're accusing that you're saying is breaking the Sabbath? I'm the Son of Man, and I am the Lord of the Sabbath.